Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
You used the term hydroplate a number of times.
Yeah.
I tried to do some appropriation science like research, but I've not heard the term hydroplate. You didn't define that term during your lecture. Could you do that now?
I can make an attempt at it.
So you connected it to asteroid formation as well?
Yeah, yeah.
If you could
Yeah.
include that in your definition and description, it would be appreciated.
Okay. The hydroplate was developed by Dr. Walt Brown. He's an Army Ranger, paratrooper, MIT, PhD from mechanical engineering. And most theories, they take a look at the effect and try and figure out what caused it. They know what the effect is, but they really don't know the cause. This is different. He sets up the cause with one assumption. Just one assumption, then he lets the laws of physics go at it, and then that explains what we see in the world around us. And his one assumption is half of the ocean was inside the Earth at one time. How it got there is not part of the theory. So just think of the Earth as a big apple, and the skin is 60 miles thick made of granite, and then there's a layer of water about a mile thick, and then underneath that there's basalt. And the granite and basalt are touching each other at certain places around the Earth. Okay, that's his one assumption. And then he lets the laws of physics go at it. You got the moon tugging on the crust. And back then, the crust wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It was just the crust. So it's going to stretch and compress twice a day. It's going to generate heat. Heat goes into the water. Water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. It wants to boil, but it can't because there's no room to expand. And then at 705 degrees and 3200 psi, it becomes supercritical water. They know about it. It's not very well known, but they've known about it for 100 years, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's dissolving the mantle above, or the granite above, and the basalt below, and mixing stuff together and making stuff like limestone and silica and quartz and salts in the subterranean chamber. And then eventually the crust gets weak enough where it cracks. As more and more pressure, Walt Brown thinks it's probably 372,000 psi in that water. And then when it just cracks, it's going to rip around the Earth in two directions, that crack does, and like a seam on the baseball, and then it cracks and then it comes together again. And then the water just erupts out of there with tremendous force. And that's how it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And people say, well, if that happened on the Earth, wouldn't it leave a mark? And the mark, yeah, it did. It's the MidAtlantic Ridge. That's a 46,000-mile mountain range that goes around the bottoms of the oceans. And that's where the water was shooting up. So now you got two cliffs 60 miles high, and they're crumbling into this supersonic water flowing up. Because on Earth, you can only have a cliff 5 miles high, or it's going to crumble. Now these are 60 miles high. So that's where all this granite and basalt, this sedimentary rock. I always wondered, where did all this sediment come from for the sedimentary rock? Well, it was getting eroded away from this, from the fountains. Okay, and then now that you got the cliffs getting wider and wider and wider, well, pretty soon there's nothing pushing down on the MidAtlantic Ridge, and it bulges. So now you got North America and South America sliding to the west, Africa and Europe sliding to the east, and they keep going until they hit resistance, and then they buckle up and form mountains. And so now you got a big mass on a small base, and that sinks in. Well, if something sinks in, something's got to rise up, and that's how the plateaus form. They really can't explain how a plateau forms in the Colorado anyway. And so then the same thing, and then with the MidAtlantic Ridge rising up everywhere, something has to sink in, and that's the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean sunk in, and that's why you get the ring of fire. That's why you got all those volcanoes down there, and there's a lot of molten, and that's why you got the trenches in the Pacific. And so then all the water gushes off the continents, which was, the water was covering the continents. Now it gushes off, cuts those submarine canyons, and then the continents sink down and the oceans rise up and fill that in. And then again, some of the stuff was going with such tremendous force that it escaped our gravitational pull. And it just kept on going. And that's where the the theory started with 10 kilometers thick and then 10 miles thick and now 60 miles thick, because he keeps adding stuff. He thinks that the trans-Neptune objects came from inside the Earth. He thinks that I think Pluto could even be formed that way. And so it's an interesting theory. It may not be right on every detail, but I think the framework is very, very solid and very robust because it makes accurate predictions. And so that's my 5-minute attempt at explaining the hydroplate. But I encourage you, I mean, and it's been around for decades. That's what irritates me the most. How come we weren't banging this drum for the last 40 years? We'd have more scientific clout than we'd know what to do with, because it seems like 5 or 10 years we got an accurate prediction that's just astounding. And so, again, I can't do anything about the past, but I can do something about the future. And so I'm trying, and we got our very first Hydroplate Conference online. It's never happened in the history of the world.
And this is a conference up at State?
No, this was online. It was an online conference, hydroplate.org. You're going to be able to see all the talks. And one of the talks is problems with plate tectonics, problems with models, earthquakes, comets. Yeah, hydroplate.org. There's also a YouTube channel with the Hydroplate channel. Brian Nickel does a great job for explaining it visually, especially the Grand Canyon one. It's just amazing. But yeah, that's the theory that I think gives us the proper perspective of the past, and it's making accurate predictions. And I'm really, 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 really trying to get the professors to take a look at it and the students to take a look at it, because they should have competing hypotheses. They shouldn't just be banging the big bang drum down people's throat. There should be another perspective. And I think this is the theory that I think has the potential to throw the Big Bang on the trash heap of history. So again, it's the hydroplate. rsr.org/HPT is a good one too, where you can hear, and what colored in the details for me is when I listened to Walt Brown Week on Real Science Radio, rsr.org, Walt Brown Week. He explained it all, and it's like, wow. And I've never seen the world the same again, or the solar system. And so I encourage you to go into RSR, and support them if you can, and Real Science Radio. And then you can get the 9th edition for free. Download it. Go into rsr.org/HPT, scroll down to the book, hit 9th edition, and get it. And I think everybody should have that, so we don't have to depend on the internet, because that could be taken down like that. So that's the hydroplate in a nutshell. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you thought about including any of Christian Smoot's findings in your presentation?
That's a good point. Yeah. Christian Smoot, he's the one that mapped the ocean floor, and he figured out that plate tectonics doesn't work. And there is a book out there that's called 20 Reasons Why Plate Tectonics Doesn't Work, and I think she cites Christian Smoot. And I should. Yeah, that's a good point, because the evidence is there that the plate tectonics doesn't work. And catastrophic plate tectonics, which is just a secular model sped up. It's kind of like theistic evolution. It's just a secular model trying to with God slapped on it. And so, and that's why I really like the hydroplate, because and that it does have biblical support as far as the earth being stretched out above the waters in the fountains of the great deep. And there's several verses that do have biblical support for the water being inside the earth at one point in time. And but yeah, it's an exciting theory. I encourage people to get versed on it, and you'll have a blast. You really will. It's like, wow, I can explain this and this and this and this. And then you get the boldness. Yes?
And then you find out that all scientists work for Walt Brown.
All scientists work for Walt Brown. That's right. You must be a Real Science Radio fan.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. rsr.org. Yeah, Fred's done a really good job, him and Doug McBurney. Yeah, all scientists do work for Walt Brown. So then they'll put this little sign on a comet that says Walt Brown was here. And yeah, it is my favorite website. And so when I'm driving out to Colorado or out to Pennsylvania, I'll be listening to Real Science Radio over and over and over again. They've got it's a really entertaining way to learn something. And I remember sitting at a red light one time, and Fred Williams is making the case that evolution is not a theory. It's barely a hypothesis. He says it's a low-grade hypothesis. And then Bob says, no, it's not a low-grade hypothesis. It's a high-grade fever-induced delusion. And that's what I did too. I was laughing at Bob. And then what else did he say? When you start with nothing plus nothing equals everything, there's no limit to the amount of mistakes you're going to make. And Bob, he He was a national treasure, he really was. And he left all that stuff for us, and I encourage you guys to listen to it. You know, he's not with us anymore, but boy, did he leave a treasure trove behind. I'm just amazed at what he did with his life, and it's just incredible, all the stuff he did and everything he knew. Yes?
Your brief description of the hydroplate concept
Yeah.
resonated with some of the exhibits I saw at Answers in Genesis Museum down in Kentucky. And so now that you're talking, it makes me wonder, have there been any conversation between you, hydroplating, and Answers in Genesis, or are they willing to entertain further concepts that some of their own exhibits would seem to support?
Yeah, there has been conversations. I know Bob Enyart, he's been to the Ark many times, and he went there and he was so mad. It's like they got the moon beat up before the flood. You know, during Creation Week, he said the moon wasn't beat up before the flood. And there is a side shore, there has been conversations. I do believe that ICR will probably be the first major one that's going to endorse it.
Really?
I believe that because Randy Galuza, he invited the hydroplate people in to present to his scientists. He said, I want to know what the hydroplate people say. I don't want to know what people say about the hydroplate people. And last December, Kevin Lee was one of them, and I think he talked about that on Real Science Radio. And I have so much respect for Randy Galuza. I really do. That must not have been an easy thing for them to do because they've got their own catastrophic plate tectonic books. But he says, I want my scientists to know what theories are out there. And I just have so much respect for him. I was able to thank him personally. He spoke up in Harris, Minnesota, and I thanked him for allowing that. And he said, you know what, the hydroplate's been marginalized for far too long. And again, he is one of the best speakers I've seen and heard, especially with his continuous environmental tracking. And and for him to go out on that hydroplate limb, that must not have been easy, but thank God for it. Go where the truth, go where science leads you. And if it's making accurate predictions, it should be studied. They shouldn't be censoring it. And if you want to know why you haven't heard about it for 40 years, go into rsrs.org/answers and scroll way down to the bottom, and there's a thing that says Walt Brown controversy. And you're going to be able to see what happened and why it hasn't been taught. And it's really a sad day, what happened in the past. But that's the past. You can't change that. We just move on. And but anyhow, we got the high ground, and I think we need to advance. You guys should all road trip up to St. Cloud State. It's going to be a lot of fun next Tuesday. Yes.
I think the website, the TCCSA website, says that it's in Ashland, Wisconsin.
Yeah, I saw that. I emailed somebody. Did that get changed? I emailed somebody to get it changed. It must not have got changed. But yeah, it's going to be at St. Cloud State. It's in the theater. It's my favorite room. And we haven't had a Grace Campus event in a while. They make it harder and harder. So we're going to do it again. Oh, and then once we got the room, they froze our account. They froze our club. They said, you're 2 students short of having a valid club. But then our president found 2 more students, so now we're up and flying again. So we're going to go in there with, and you're just saying, you just tolerate this. That's what our attitude is. We want a diversity of thought in the science class. And I've talked to the president about that because they're losing students hand over fist, even before COVID. And I said, you might be able to attract and retain more students if you allowed a diversity of thought in the science class, like intelligent design and creation. Yes?
You had several examples of irreducible complexity, but you never used that term. That seems to be the popular term. Is there a reason why you weren't using it when you used examples that are precisely that concept?
Yeah, I'm not that bright, I guess. That's a irreducible complexity. I like that. I like what Bob Enyart calls it. He calls it sublime sophistication.
There's a reason.
Yeah, I guess I'm not a technical guy. I don't know. That's a good question. Irreducible complexity, that's good. But you can write a real complex program, and just because it's complex doesn't mean it's good. It could be like 4 pages long that does one thing, That's complex. But sophisticated would be a real short program that can do a multiple of things. And that's what God's done with our DNA. There's sophistication built in. It's not complexity, it's sophisticated. And that's what Bob Enyart calls it. He's one of my heroes. All right, Q&A is kind of fun. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
With all the work that you've done on campuses, first off, thank you for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Have you seen any, like, obviously it's hard to change a whole organization like that. Have you seen any, like, personal people, like, thinking deeper about these topics?
Well, yeah. He thanked me for being on campus. Yeah, when we gave that Who's Your Daddy talk, that was the first talk we gave on campus, and this guy named Justin came up to me afterwards and he said, thank you, because I was starting to doubt the Bible based on what I was being taught in class. And typically that tends to happen. And one time there was a student, and he asked him, okay, without God, how do you determine right and wrong? You know? And he said, well, if it hurts people, it's wrong. And I said, well, you must be against abortion then. He goes, no, I'm for abortion. I said, well, doesn't it hurt the baby? And I said, by your own definition, you should be against it. And he goes, you know what, you're right, I'm against it. I couldn't believe it. Normally they'll do all these mental gymnastics, but so I'm there. Yeah, it's a burden that I have to reach the students. I remember when my pastor, and you can listen to this on northlandchurch.com, there's a title on YouTube, it was called When God's Desires Become Your Desires. And I still remember that. He's talking about when, and he did that, Jesus looked at the multitude, and he was moved with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And it just resonated in my spirit, St. Cloud State. I got to reach them. And I didn't know how to reach them, but I thought I'm going to try. And, you know, God does some good things there, you know. And sometimes it's not even so much our events, it's just that we get to put our posters next to their posters. You know, some of the posters that they have up, like, what did they have? Drag brunch. And we put our poster right in between that and the LGBT stuff. So it's, we want people to have other perspectives. You need to see both sides if you want to think, and it's not happening. You need to see both sides, and that's why I'm there. And sometimes students ask me, are you a professor? I said, no, I got way more freedom to speak than your professor does. If he says stuff like I say, he's going to get fired, you know. But yeah, it's COVID kind of knocked us out of the water, so we're starting up again. But we just go where God opens the doors. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for coming out on a Tuesday night.